You owe us your life." He said it calmly, not shouting, not joking, just stating it like a settled fact. We were standing in the parking lot behind the building long after everyone else had gone home. The lights above us flickered, buzzing faintly. I still had my keys in my hand. I remember that detail because they were pressing into my palm hard enough to leave marks. "You wouldn't be here without us," he continued. "Don't forget that." I didn't answer. Not because I agreed, because I understood something in that moment. If I argued, I'd be accepting the premise that my success belonged to them, that my growth had been rented. So I said nothing. I just looked at him, nodded once, like I'd heard every word, and walked to my car. They thought silence meant loyalty. They had no idea it meant I was already leaving. I didn't start there with ambition. I started with need. Fresh out of school, no connections, no savings, no family business waiting for me. Just a resume that looked thinner than it felt, and a willingness to work longer than anyone else in the room. When they hired me, it felt like rescue, like someone had reached down and decided I was worth a chance. They were a tight circle. Not officially a family business, but close enough. Promotions happened through proximity. Trust was inherited before it was earned. I wasn't part of that circle. I was useful. And I made myself indispensable. I stayed late without being asked, volunteered for projects no one wanted, learned systems that weren't in my job description. When mistakes happened, I absorbed them quietly. When successes came, I redirected credit upward. I told myself that patience would convert into opportunity. To their credit, they did reward me. At first. Small raises, bigger responsibilities, access to rooms I wasn't supposed to enter yet. They introduced me to clients as one of ours. That phrase mattered to me more than it should have. But slowly, the tone shifted. The praise became possessive. My wins were framed as their mentorship. My ideas were retold in meetings without my name attached. Whenever I pushed for autonomy, someone reminded me where I started. Remember who gave you your shot. I did remember. That was the problem. Gratitude is powerful when it's clean, but when it's used as leverage, it changes shape. I began noticing how often my growth was described as something they had allowed, not something I had built. The first time I suggested expanding independently, it was treated like disloyalty. Jokes were made about biting the hand. I laughed along, even as something inside me tightened. At home, I ran numbers in private. What I earned, what I generated, the gap between them widening. I didn't want revenge. I wanted ownership. The right to build without being told I was borrowed. Still, I stayed. Because leaving felt ungrateful. Because they had taken a chance on me. Because I didn't yet understand the difference between opportunity and obligation. Until that night in the parking lot, when the sentence was said plainly, "You owe us your life." And suddenly, everything they had framed as generosity looked more like a contract I had never agreed to sign. The real break didn't happen in the parking lot. It happened 2 weeks later, in a conference room with glass walls. I had prepared a proposal quietly, a structured expansion plan built from the last 3 years of results. Not rebellion, not departure. A formal request to lead a new division under clear terms, shared equity, transparent revenue structure, operational control. I wasn't asking to leave. I was asking to build. They listened without interrupting. That should have warned me. When I finished, there was a long pause, not thoughtful, but calculated. Then one of them leaned back and smiled. "This is ambitious," he said, "for someone we brought in from nothing." The phrase landed deliberately. Another chimed in. You're thinking like an owner. That's flattering. But let's not confuse opportunity with entitlement. They didn't critique the numbers. They didn't question the feasibility. They questioned my position. I felt the room tilt slightly. Not emotionally, but structurally. I understood what was happening. If they acknowledged the proposal seriously, they'd have to acknowledge my independence. So instead, they reframed it as arrogance. Then the sentence came again. Softer this time. Almost fatherly. We invested in you. You owe us loyalty. Not partnership, loyalty. And in that moment, I saw the invisible ceiling clearly for the first time. There would always be a reminder. Always a story about where I started. Always a subtle subtraction from anything I achieved. I closed my folder slowly. I'm not asking for a favor, I said. I'm asking for alignment. They exchanged glances, the kind people share when they've already decided. You're not ready for that, one of them said. Not ready, after everything I had built. That was the moment the illusion collapsed. Not anger, not betrayal, just clarity. The growth they celebrated was acceptable only as long as it remained dependent. The second it became self-directed, it was threatening. I didn't argue. I nodded once, same way I had in the parking lot. Understood, I said. And I meant it, because I finally understood that staying would mean shrinking, strategically, permanently. The meeting ended with polite words, future discussions, continued collaboration. But when I walked out of that glass room, I wasn't considering negotiation anymore. I was calculating exit. I didn't resign immediately. That would have been emotional, and they were waiting for that. Waiting for me to react in a way they could frame as impulsive, immature, ungrateful. So I stayed, and I prepared. I stopped volunteering for extra work, stopped offering solutions before being asked. I did my job, precisely, efficiently, but no more. For the first time in years, I protected my energy instead of pouring it into something I didn't control. They noticed. The tone shifted again. More check-ins, more reminders about team culture, casual comments about how independence could be misinterpreted by clients. The message underneath was simple. Don't forget your place. At night, I built my own framework. Contacts I had nurtured personally. Clients who trusted my judgment more than the brand. Processes I had designed quietly over years. I wasn't stealing. I was organizing what had always been mine. Relationships built on trust, not on ownership claims. The risk was real. I had savings, but not enough for comfort. Walking away would mean losing steady income, status, access. It would mean explaining to people why I had left a great opportunity. It would also mean no one standing over me, reminding me who I was supposed to be grateful to. The pressure intensified when they sensed distance. One afternoon, I was called into another meeting. Smaller room this time. Fewer smiles. "We've heard you might be exploring options," one of them said. I didn't confirm. I didn't deny. Another leaned forward. "You need to be careful," he said. "The market remembers who helped you." It wasn't advice. It was a warning. They framed it as concern, as protection, as if the world outside was hostile and only they could shield me from it. I realized then how dependency is maintained. Not through contracts, but through fear. The fear that you'll fail without the structure that once lifted you. For weeks, I lived in that tension. The known security versus the unknown autonomy. The paycheck versus the possibility. Then something small tipped it. A client I had worked closely with called me directly. Not the company line, not through the official channel. He wanted my perspective, not theirs. When I gave it, he said something simple. "We trust you." Not the firm, me. That sentence settled everything. They believed I owed them my life because they had opened a door, but I had walked through it, and I had built something on the other side. By the time they invited me to another alignment discussion, I wasn't weighing options anymore. I was deciding timing, because silence had already done its work. They still thought I was negotiating my value within their structure. They didn't understand that I was preparing to remove myself from it entirely. I resigned on a Monday morning. Not dramatically. Not at the end of a confrontation. I requested a standard meeting, the kind we'd held dozens of times before. I brought a single envelope. They assumed it was another proposal, another attempt to negotiate terms inside their framework. When I slid it across the table, they didn't open it immediately. "What's this?" one of them asked, already suspicious. "My notice," I said. That was the first time I saw something close to uncertainty in their faces. They opened it, read it, looked back at me. "You're making a mistake," one of them said quickly. "You're not ready to stand alone." There it was again. Not ready. I kept my voice even. I'm not standing alone. They didn't understand what I meant until I continued. "I've secured independent backing. The division I proposed? It's happening. Just not here." The silence that followed felt different from the others. This one wasn't dismissive. It was calculating. They were running numbers in their heads. Clients, relationships, influence. "You can't just walk away with what we built," another said. "I'm not," I replied. "I'm walking away with what I built." That was the line that shifted the room. For the first time, they couldn't lean on gratitude, couldn't position themselves as benefactors, because leaving without anger, without accusation, stripped them of the narrative they relied on. They tried one last angle. "We took a chance on you." I nodded. "And I honored it," I said. "But a chance isn't ownership." No raised voices, no slammed doors. I stood, shook their hands, the same hands that once felt like lifelines, and walked out. In the hallway, my pulse finally caught up to me. My hands were steady, but my chest felt hollow. Fear and relief braided together. I had no guarantee of success. What I had was something I'd been missing for years. Freedom without permission. They thought I owed them my life. What I actually owed myself was the courage to stop asking them if I was allowed to live it. The first months on my own were not triumphant. They were quiet, careful, measured in invoices and late-night spreadsheets instead of applause. I worked from a small rented space with thin walls and unreliable heat. There were days I questioned everything, especially when payments were delayed or deals took longer than expected. Freedom feels different when you're responsible for it. But something else felt different too. No one reminded me where I started. No one reframed my ideas as borrowed ambition. When a client signed, it was because they chose me, not the structure behind me. When a mistake happened, it was mine to fix, not someone else's leverage to use later. Word spread slowly, then steadily. The division I had once proposed under their roof began operating independently. Leaner, more transparent, built on equity structures I'd only been allowed to imagine before. The clients who moved over did so carefully, not out of rebellion, but trust. Months later, I heard they were restructuring internally. Turnover, rebranding, a shift in leadership philosophy. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt distant. We crossed paths once at an industry event. Polite nods, measured smiles. No mention of the parking lot. No repetition of the sentence that once echoed in my head. You owe us your life. I don't think they believed it as firmly anymore. Leaving cost me stability. It cost me sleep. It cost me the comfort of being protected by something larger than myself. But it also stripped away something heavier. The quiet shame of knowing I was capable of more, and asking permission to pursue it. Success didn't arrive overnight. It arrived gradually, built from decisions I owned fully. And that, more than anything, made it impossible for anyone to claim it as theirs.